Professor. Class is back in session, but this time it's more like I'm like a substitute teacher than like a full-scale professor, because this time I'm sort of winging it. I'm sort of going off the cuff, working on a big video that should be coming out eventually. And I watched the White Lotus season 1 on HBO Max, and well, now I have all these thoughts about the White Lotus. I'm just gonna share them. I'm just gonna give it to you guys. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna break it down into 5 categories: acting, direction, writing, specifically focusing on plot for the most part, music, and of course themes and analysis. The White Lotus Season 1 came out in 2021. It is an HBO production, created and directed by Mike White. This show is an anthology series, so each season is distinct from the other season. So I'm just going to review Season 1 as sort of a thing in its own right. Let's start off with the writing. The plot was pretty good. It definitely didn't hit the ball completely out of the park, but what I appreciated about how they did the plot lines in this show was that they sort of kept the plot lines mysterious, which went along very well with the atmosphere of the show as a whole. So in the beginning of the show, there's all of these new arrivals at the hotel, and as we're being introduced to the characters and their sort of dynamics between them, we're not entirely sure what's really going to spark off. For instance, there is this plotline between Shane, one of the honeymooners, and Armand, the hotel's manager, where Armand gives Shane a room that they didn't book. It's the second biggest room in the hotel, but they had booked the biggest room. And this didn't have to be a huge plot. It could have been resolved quite quickly, but it actually ends up being one of the most consequential plot lines in the entire show. And honestly, vice versa with the plotline of the trainee in the first episode giving birth. That could have been really big. That could have been really important for the plot of the show. But actually, it serves more just to sort of highlight where Armand is at when the show starts. Just how beaten down and cynical he already is by the first episode in the show, because he has no clue that she's pregnant. He doesn't see the trainee as a person. And that sort of is the first step in his eventual downfall. The show does this with all of its plot lines. It sort of keeps them mysterious. It keeps you wondering what is going to be important. And that keeps you engaged. That keeps you thinking which of these plot lines is going to pop off at which time, which I really enjoy. My partner did have one big sort of gripe, and that's that they said that there weren't any really likable characters in the show. And I get that, I sort of agree with it. I mean, outside of Belinda and Rachel, and then maybe Quinn and Paula, maybe Kai as well, I don't think there's really any other sympathetic characters in the show. These people aren't really that likable, but I think they aren't supposed to be. Moving on to the acting aspect, I do think that the acting in the show is pretty good, and honestly, a lot of that comes from just how they cast it, maybe more than the performances themselves. It seemed very intentional how they cast this show. They picked particular actors to work with other particular actors. Each of these plot lines that went on in the show were self-contained in many ways. Jennifer Coolidge did interact with the girls from the Mossbacher family, for example. But for the most part, the Mossbachers were interacting with themselves. Shane was interacting with Rachel and Armand. And they sort of stayed in their own separate silos. I think that they chose the characters really well to play off of each other within those silos. I think that, for example, the Mossbachers were chosen really well to feel like a really authentic family. There were some really good performances as well, especially with Armand's character, Jennifer Coolidge, Belinda, Rachel, as well as Shane, to be honest. And then, of course, there is direction. And I thought the direction in this was well done. It wasn't necessarily anything that blew me away, but it did feel like they were trying to take a more cinematic approach to the direction in this. It gave time for us as the audience to contemplate what's going on in the show and to feel the emotions that the characters are going through. After a big emotional scene, we might just get a minute or so of waves hitting the beach or some natural beauty from the surrounding area that helps us think on what is the environment that these characters are really in. And that honestly goes along really well with the music in the show, which I think pairs hand in hand with the direction. It is similarly paired with the environment that the show is set in. It has a lot of chanting, a lot of rhythm, percussion-based instrumentals that climax very slowly and that often sort of have religious or faithful or spiritual overtones to them. And that invites you sort of to reflect on everything that's going on. The way that the show moves is like the waves on the beach in Hawaii where it's set. They come in these big grand cascades and then they sort of fizzle out, and all of the power from that you can see sort of broken down into its constituent pieces as it comes into shore. And I really enjoy that it doesn't just shove everything in your face all at once. It doesn't just want to keep up the action. It keeps you engaged by thinking about what the characters are going through. And that sort of leads me into my transition into themes. I think that the primary themes in the show are A, white colonialism, and B, how people use money to alter their relationships with any of the people that they interact with. And the show does really well to show us as the audience how brash it is for all of these people who really have nothing to do with Hawaii or with the people there to come in and spend their money on something for themselves and just expect everyone to cater to their every need just because they have all of this money, even if their use of that money causes the downfall of the people that they're paying. We see it with Tanya and Belinda's relationship. Tanya sort of holds this promise of money over the head of Belinda the whole time in order to extract her help in a time of need, and then she doesn't deliver on it in the end. And so Tanya comes out of it with everything she could have wanted, and Belinda really gets nothing despite all of her time and effort. That division is there just because Tanya has the money and Belinda doesn't. And Tanya uses that to her advantage. I mean, we see a similar thing in an even more complicated sense in Paula and Kai's storyline. Paula thinks that she's doing what's right for Kai. She does see the negative impacts of white colonialism on the native Hawaiians, but she doesn't actually listen to her Hawaiian lover when he tells her that he doesn't want to get back at them the way that she wants to. So, in a way, she is continuing to uphold systems of oppression as a foreigner in their land, even though she sees some of what's going on. Because eventually, what she encourages Kai to do is what leads to his downfall and his arrest. And she feels all of this guilt for it. Kai takes the brunt of this, and then she feels the pain of it. But the Mossbachers, who they were trying to get back at and sort of started this domino effect in the first place, they don't even feel the pain. They get their money back, and they leave happier than when they got there. And the question is, why do they deserve that? Well, what the show tells us is they don't deserve that, but that's what they get because they have the money, because they have white skin. That's what they get in our society. And it's not fair, but it is the way that it is. And I appreciate that the show portrays it that way and shows us how messed up it is to have those sort of dynamics happening constantly. It is, I will say, disappointing that almost all of the plot lines end with these white colonialists winning. I mean, especially with Shane. But I really appreciate how it shows that. To feel much more authentic, and together with that very sort of spiritual music and time to contemplate, it really helps the themes to hit home. And that's where I think the show is at its strongest. Contemplating those themes, giving us time to think about it. And yeah, it has some interesting things that it does with the plot, like doing the flash forward at the beginning to the dead body that we assume is Rachel's. And I think that's really interesting, but it's in ideological reflection that the show really hits home. That's part of what made it stick for me so much. So, altogether, it's a banger, it's a bop, you know what it is. It's a good show. You should check it out if you haven't already. Altogether, for me, that's going to be an 8.5 out of 10 on the scale. So let me know if you liked this more off the cuff sort of content. I'll see if I can edit it into a sort of way that makes sense and make it not long as shit. So, hope y'all enjoyed this. Like, subscribe, etc. Don't forget to pack your lunch. Mommy loves you.